Okay. This bothers me. Between the browsers I have open, one of them says the ads are over in less than a minute. Another one says the ads are over in 3 minutes. So, I don't know how the ads are. And ads are just annoying to start with. I wish I could afford to stream without them. In all honesty, I can't really afford to stream in the first place. But I'm doing it anyway. Okay, let me shut a few things down. So hopefully things will run a teensy bit smoother. Oh. I get model stuff reconnected. Okay, that's there, that's there. Because I do like to have my redeems open for Fairy Tale. Okay, Stream Manager says I still have like 3 minutes. So that's break remaining. So I honestly don't know which is out. Yeah. I guess I could use this time to remind everyone that, hey, you know what? I got a book. Which is a book of pretty much the fairy tales I read on my first 3 streams. It has 16 stories in this one little book up here. And I do have it in both versions, the artwork and the one without artwork. Man, my fan is still coming out loud on this thing. Oh well, fan is off. So, how is everyone doing on this fine Friday evening? Look at the forward. Not the... I thought I had on the Switch goal. The subscriber goal. Yeah, that one. Oh well. I would much I'd be a lot happier if, I hit one of the goals. The 300 follower goal would be a lot easier to get to, I would imagine. Let's see. Is my lovely assistant Kel actually here? So she isn't. I'll post my links myself. So let's see. Where are my links? Where are my links? So I got a lot of links. Probably way more than I need. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. There we go. Cool. No, I don't want to look at email right now. Anyway, links. Those go to most of the versions of the book. Yeah, if any of you who follow me regularly don't have a copy already. If you do have a copy of it already, I thank you. If you don't have a copy, man, you missed out during the subathon, because I was giving them away. No, giving a couple copies away. I think I ended up giving out 3 copies. But yeah, those are the links to all the some of the places where my book is available. The Grey Wolf edition, which has the branding on it, is available on most online most online bookstores right now. And to my knowledge, only 1 copy has been sold. But hey, it's out there if anyone wants one. Or if you want me to autograph one for you, you can use the eBay links, because I've got a couple of the hardbacks and a couple of the paperbacks that I will sign and send to you. You just have to drop me a message on what you might want me to say to it in particular, if there's anything you want me to say, or I'll just make up my own random stuff, like I do. But I would say we are starting a new fairy tale book tonight, but most of the fairy tales are going to be somewhat familiar, because, well, fairy tales are everywhere. But this book is the Red Fairy Book by Andrew and Leonora Lang. And they were one of the groups of people that did the most contribution to translating the fairy tales into English. In fact, if it weren't for these particular people, a lot of these fairy tales may not have been heard. Well, that's without, his elder grandmother. Cool. I hope you get it. So did you put it on one of the Amazon ones, or did you find one of the ones at the bookstore, or? Ah, okay. Cool. Thank you for getting it on your wish list. That's cool. Always good to know that people do want my book. I am working on the book 2 already, and it's mostly editing and such, and top of me trying to do the book of my own lore, which, I don't know if anyone would want that or not. But I am working on book 2, so hopefully I'll have it, if I actually get myself in gear and pay attention to what the hell I'm doing, I might have it out early next year. It's a lot of typing. That's me just revising most of the stories, because I'm just having to. I'm putting that off. Cat things. What's going on with the cat? Ah. That is a lot of feline preparation. Not that I can't say I've got 3 of my own, so. But cats are good cats. I think I've only had one that was temperamental on all the cats that I've dealt with in my life. But even then, it wasn't that bad. So. Ooh. Okay, good. Skip over to. Oh, not going down the forest. Not the haunted forest. This one. Check my fireplace to make sure it's going properly. Oop, it is not. I reset. So what kind of cat did you get? Or just cat? Yeah. Well, let's see. It's about time. I should probably get into the book here in a second. But cats are fun. A cast form. A Sunday cast form. And yet it is showing up at night. Oh. Oh, it does have a preface. Nice. Oh, okay. I'm going, duh. Anyway, this is actually the second of Andrew Lang's fairy book series. The first one was the Blue Fairy Book, which I've already done. But there's 15 or so in all. So I've got a lot of reading to catch up on. Fix something real quick. Where's it? There it is. Chat window just a little bit smaller. There we go. Anyway. The book starts with a preface by the author, which is always a really nice thing to do. As I said, this is the second of the fairy books, the first one being the blue. I'm half tempted to put my books kind of the same way and just do a different color per book, but no, I haven't figured that much out yet. Gotta finish writing it before I start designing cover. They'll probably be close to the same cover as the first one. So. Anyway. The Red Fairy Book. Preface. In a second gleaning of the fields of fairyland, we cannot expect to find a second Perrault. But there are good stories enough left, and it is hoped that some in the Red Fairy Book may have the attraction of being less familiar than many of the old friends. The tales have been translated, or, in the case of those from Madame de Lannoy's long stories, adapted, by Mrs. Hunt from the Norse, and by Miss Minnie Wright from Madame d'Aulnoy, by Mrs. Lang and Miss Bruce from the other French sources, by Miss May Seller, Miss Farquharson, and Miss Blakely from the German, while the story of Sigurd is condensed by the editor from Mr. William Morris's prose of the Wolfsoga saga. The editor has to thank his friend M. Charles Morales for permission to reproduce his versions of the Pied Piper of Drakestall and of Little Golden Hood from the French, and M. Henry Carnoy for the same privilege in regard to The Six Sillies from La Tradition. Lady Frances Balfour has kindly copied an old version of Jack and the Beanstalk, and Mrs. Smith and Elder have permitted the publication of all two of Mr. Ralston's versions from the Russian. So this book really does have fairy tales from all over the place. And the first wonderful story for tonight which I'm sure most of you have heard because I think I read it maybe 3 or so weeks ago. Different book. So the wording will be different between stories. It's always interesting to find that in different translations. But the 12 Dancing Princesses. Once upon a time there lived in the village of Montigny-sur-Roc a little cowboy, without either father nor mother. His real name was Michael, but he was always called the Stargazer, because when he drove his cows over the commons to seek the pasture, he went along with his head up in the air, gaping at nothing. As he had white skin, blue eyes, and hair that curled all over his head, The village girls used to cry after him, "Well, Stargazer, what are you doing?" And Michael would answer, "Oh, nothing," and go on his way without even turning to look at them. The fact was that he thought them very ugly, with their sunburnt cheeks, their great red hands, and their coarse petticoats and their wooden shoes. He had heard that somewhere in the world there were girls whose necks were white, whose hands were small, and who were always dressed in the finest silks and laces, and were called princesses. And while his companions round the fire saw nothing in the flames but, common everyday fancies, he dreamed that he had the happiness to marry a princess. One morning, about the middle of August, just at midday when the sun was hottest, Michael ate his dinner of a piece of dry bread and went to sleep under an oak. And while he slept, he dreamt that there appeared before him a beautiful lady, dressed in a robe of cloth of gold, who said to him, "Go to the castle of Bellelio, and there you shall marry a princess." That evening the little cowboy, who had been thinking a great deal about the advice of the lady in the golden dress, told his dream to the farm people. But, as was natural, they only laughed at the stargazer. The next day, at the same hour, he went to sleep again under the same tree. The lady appeared to him a second time, and said, "Go to the castle of Bellelio, and you shall marry a princess." In the evening, Michael told his friends that he had dreamed the same dream again, but they only laughed at him more than before. "Never mind," he thought to himself. "If the lady appears to me a third time, I will do what she tells me." The following day, the same astonishment of the village. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a voice was heard singing, "Riley-o, Riley-o, how the cattle go." It was a little cowboy driving his herd back to the byre. The farmer began to scold him furiously, but he answered quietly, "I'm going away." He made his clothes into a bundle and said goodbye to all his friends, and boldly set out to seek his fortunes. There was a great excitement through all the village, and on top of the hill the people stood holding their sides and laughing as they watched the stargazer trudging bravely along the valley with his bundle at the end of a stick. It was enough to make anyone laugh, certainly. It was well known for full 20 miles round that there lived in the castle of Belial 12 princesses of wonderful beauty, and as proud as they were beautiful, and who were besides so very sensitive of such truly royal blood that they would have felt at once the presence of a pea in their beds, even if the mattresses had been laid over it. It was whispered about that they led exactly the lives that princesses ought to lead, sleeping far into the morning and never getting up till midday. They had 12 beds, all in the same room, but it was very extraordinary was that the fact that though they were locked in by triple bolts, every morning their satin shoes were found worn into holes. When they were asked what they had been doing all night, they always answered that they had been asleep, and indeed no noise was ever heard in the room, yet the shoes could not wear themselves out alone. At last the Duke of Belial ordered the trumpet to be sounded and a proclamation to be made that whoever could discover how his daughters wore out their shoes should choose one of them for his wife. On hearing the proclamation, a number of princes arrived at the castle to try their luck. They watched all night behind the open door of the princesses, but when the morning came, they had all disappeared, and no one could tell what had become of them. When he reached the castle, Michael went straight to the gardener and offered his services. Now, it happened that the garden boy had just been sent away, and though the stargazer did not look very sturdy, the gardener agreed to take him, as he thought the pretty face and golden curls might please a princess. The first thing he did was tell him that when the princesses got up, he was to present each one with a bouquet. And Michael thought that if he had nothing more unpleasant to do than that, he should get on very well. Accordingly, he placed himself behind the door of the princess's room, with 12 bouquets in a basket. He gave each one to the sisters, and they took them without even deigning to look at the lad, except for Lena, the youngest, who fixed her large black eyes as soft as velvet on him and exclaimed, "Oh, how pretty he is, our new flower boy!" The rest of them all burst out laughing. The eldest pointed out that a princess ought not lower herself to looking at a garden boy. Now Michael knew quite well what had happened to all the princes, but notwithstanding the beautiful eyes of the Princess Lena inspired him with a violent longing to try his fate. Unhappily, he did not dare to come forward, being afraid that he should only be jeered at, or even turned away from the castle on the account of his impudence. Nevertheless, the stargazer had another dream. The lady in the golden dress appeared to him once more, holding in one hand 2 young laurel trees, a cherry laurel and a rose laurel, and in the other hand a little golden rake, a little golden bucket, and a silken towel. She thus addressed him: "Take these 2 laurels into 2 large pots. Rake them over with the rake, and water them with the bucket, and wipe them with the towel. When they have grown as tall as a girl of 15, say to each of them, 'My beautiful laurel, with the golden rake I have raked you, with the golden bucket I have watered you, and with the silken towel I have wiped you.' Then after that ask anything you choose, and the laurels will give it to you." Michael thanked the lady in the golden dress, and when he woke he found the 2 laurel bushes beside him. So he carefully obeyed the orders he had been given by the lady. The trees grew very fast, and when they were as tall as a girl of 15, he said to the cherry laurel, "My lovely cherry laurel, with the golden rake I have raked thee, and with the golden bucket I have watered thee, and with the silken towel I have wiped thee. Teach me how to become invisible." Then there instantly appeared on the laurel a pretty white flower, which Michael gathered and stuck into his buttonhole. That evening, when the princesses went upstairs to bed, he followed them barefoot, so that he might make no noise, and hid himself under one of the 12 beds, as not to take up much room. The princesses began at once to open their wardrobes and boxes. They took out of them the most magnificent dresses, which they put on before their mirrors, and when they had finished, turned themselves all around to admire their appearances. Michael could see nothing from his hiding place, but he could hear everything, and he listened to the princesses laughing and jumping with pleasure. At last the eldest said, "Be quick, my sisters. Our partners will be impatient." At the end of an hour, when the stargazer heard no more noise, he peeped out from his hiding place, and he saw the 12 sisters in splendid garments, with their satin shoes on their feet, and in their hands the bouquets he had brought them. "Are you ready?" asked the oldest. "Yes," replied the other 11 in chorus, and they took their places one by one behind her. Then the eldest princess clapped her hands 3 times, and a trap door opened. All the princesses disappeared down a secret staircase, and Michael was hastily following them. As he was falling on the steps of Princess Lena, he carefully trod upon her dress. "There's someone behind me!" cried the princess. "They're holding my dress!" "You foolish thing," said her elder sister. "You are always afraid of something. It is only a nail which caught you." They went down, 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 till at last they came to a passage with a door at one end, which was only fastened with a latch. The eldest princess opened it, and they found themselves immediately in a lovely little wood, where the leaves were spangled with drops of silver which shone in the brilliant light of the moon. They next crossed another wood, where the leaves were sprinkled with gold, and after that another still, where the leaves glittered with diamonds. At last the stargazer perceived a large lake, and on the shore of the lake were 12 little boats with awnings, in which were seated 12 princes, who, grasping their oars, awaited the princesses. Each princess entered one of the boats, and Michael slipped into the boat which held the youngest. The boats glided along rapidly, but Lena's, from being heavier, was always behind the rest. "We never went this slowly before," said the princess. "What can be the reason?" "I don't know," answered the prince. "I assure you I am rowing as hard as I can." On the other side of the lake, the garden boy saw a beautiful castle, splendidly illuminated, whence came the lively music of fiddles, kettle drums, and trumpets. In a moment they touched land, and the company jumped out from the boats, and the princes, after having securely fastened their boats, gave their arms to the princesses, and conducted them into the castle. Michael followed and entered the ballroom in their train. Everywhere were mirrors, lights, flowers, and damask hangings. The stargazer was quite bewildered at the magnificence of the sight. He placed himself out of the way in a corner, admiring the grace and beauty of the princesses. Their loveliness was of every kind. Some were fair, some were dark, some had chestnut hair, or curls darker still, and some had golden locks. Never were so many beautiful princesses seen together at one time, but the one whom the cowboy thought was the most beautiful and the most fascinating was a little princess with the black velvet eyes. With what eagerness she danced! Leaning on her partner's shoulder, she was swept by like a whirlwind. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkled, and it was plain that she loved dancing better than anything else. The poor boy envied those handsome young men with whom she danced so gracefully, but he did not know how little reason he had to be jealous of them. The youngest men were really the princes, who, to the number of 50 at least, had tried to steal the princess's secret. The princesses had made them drink something of a philtre, which froze the heart and left nothing but the love of dancing. They danced on till the shoes of the princesses were worn into holes. When the cock crowed the 3rd time, the fiddle stopped, and a delicious supper was served by Negro boys, consisting of sugared orange flowers, crystallized rose leaves, powdered violets, cracknels, wafers, and other dishes which are, as everyone knows, the favorite food of princesses. After supper, all the dancers went back to their boats, and this time the stargazer entered that of the eldest princess. They crossed again the wood of the diamond-spangled leaves, the wood of the gold-sprinkled leaves, and those of the silver-dropped leaves, and as proof of what he had seen, the boy broke a small branch from a tree in the last wood. Linda turned as she heard the noise made by the breaking of the branch. "What was that noise?" she asked. "It was nothing," replied her elder sister. "It was only the screech of a barn owl that roosts in one of the turrets of the castle." While she was speaking, Michael managed to slip in front, and running up the staircase, he reached the princess's room first. He flung open the window, and sliding down a vine which climbed up the wall, found himself in the garden, just as the sun was beginning to rise, and it was time for him to set to work. That day, when he made up the bouquets, Michael hid the branch with the silver drops in the nosegay intended for the youngest princess. When Lena discovered it, she was so much surprised. However, she did nothing to her sisters, but she met the boy by accident while she was walking under the shade of the elms. She suddenly stopped, as if to speak to him, then, altering her mind, went the other way. The same evening, the 12 sisters went again to the ball, and the stargazer again followed them and crossed the lake in Lena's boat. This time it was the prince who complained that the boat was very heavy. "It is the heat," replied the princess. "I, too, have been feeling warm." During the ball, she looked everywhere for the gardener's boy, but she never saw him. As they came back, Michael gathered a branch from the wood of the gold-spangled leaves, and now it was the eldest princess who heard a noise of that made when it was breaking. "Oh, it was nothing," said Lena. "Only the cry of the owl which roosts in the turret of the castle." As soon as she got up, she found the branch in her bouquet. When the sisters went down, she stayed a little behind and said to the cowboy, "Where does this branch come from?" "Your Royal Highness knows well enough," answered Michael. "So you have followed us?" "Yes, Princess." "How did you manage it? We never saw you." "I hid myself," replied the stargazer quietly. The princess was silent for a moment, and then said, "You know our secret. Keep it. Here is your reward for your discretion." And she flung the boy a purse of gold. "I do not sell my silence," answered Michael, and he went away without picking up the purse. For 3 nights, Lena neither saw nor heard anything extraordinary. On the 4th, she heard a rustling among the diamond-spangled leaves of the wood. That day, there was a branch of the trees in her bouquet. She took the stargazer aside and said to him in a harsh voice, "You know what price my father has promised to pay for our secret?" "I know, Princess," answered Michael. "Don't you mean to tell him?" "That is not my intention." "Are you afraid?" "No, Princess." "What makes you so discreet, then?" But Michael was silent. Lena's sisters had seen her talking to the little garden boy and jeered at her for it. "What prevents you from marrying him?" asked the eldest. "You'll become a gardener, too. It is a charming profession. You could live in a cottage at the end of the park and help your husband to drop water from the well. And when we get up in the morning, you could bring us the bouquets." Princess Lena was very angry. When she saw a stargazer presented her the bouquet, she received it in a disdainful manner. Michael behaved most respectfully. He never raised his eyes to her, but nearly all day she felt him at her side without ever seeing him. One day she made up her mind to tell everything to her eldest sister. "What?" she said. "This rogue knows our secret, and you never told me. I must lose no time in getting rid of him." "But how?" "Why, by having him taken to the tower with the dungeons, of course." For this was the way in old times beautiful princesses got rid of people who eat too much. But the astonishing part of it was that the youngest sister did not seem at all to relish this method of stopping the mouth of the gardener boy, who, after all, had said nothing to their father. It was agreed that the question should be submitted to the other 10 sisters. All were on the side of the eldest. Then the youngest sister declared that if they laid a finger on the little garden boy, she would go herself to tell their father the secret of the holes of their shoes. At last it was decided that Michael should be put to the test, that they would take him to the ball, and at the end of supper would give him the philtre, which was to enchant him like the rest. They sent for the stargazer and asked him how he had contrived to learn their secret, but still he remained silent. Then, in commanding tones, the elder sister gave him the order they had agreed upon. He only answered, "I will obey." He had really been present and visible at the council of the princesses, and had heard it all, but he had made up his mind to drink the philtre and sacrifice himself to the happiness of she he loved. Not wishing, however, to cut a poor figure at the ball by the side of the other dancers, he went once to the laurels and said, "My lovely Rose Laurel, with a golden rake I have raked thee, with a golden bucket I have watered thee, and with a silken towel I have dried thee. Dress me like a prince." A beautiful pink flower appeared. Michael gathered it and found himself in a moment clothed in velvet, which was as black as the eyes of the little princess, and with a cap to match, a diamond aigrette, and a blossom of the rose laurel in his buttonhole. Thus dressed, he presented himself that evening to the Duke of the Balliol, and obtained leave to try to discover his daughter's secrets. He looked so distinguished that hardly anyone would have known who he was. The 12 princesses went upstairs to bed. Michael followed them and waited behind the door till they gave the signal for departure. This time he did not cross in Lena's boat. He gave his arm to the elder sister, danced with each of them in turn, and was so graceful that everyone was delighted with him. At last the time came for him to dance with the little princess. She found him the best partner in the world, but he did not dare to speak a single word to her. When he was taking her back to the place, she said to him in a mocking voice, "Here you are at the summit of your wishes. You're being treated like a prince." "Don't be afraid," replied the stargazer gently. "You shall never be a gardener's wife." The little princess stared at him with a frightened face, and he left her without warning and without an answer. When the slippers were worn through, the fiddle stopped, the negro boys set the table. Michael was placed next to the eldest sister and opposite the youngest. They gave him the most exquisite dishes to eat and the most delicate wines to drink, and in order to turn his head more completely, compliments and flattery were heaped on him from every side. They gave him... but he took care not to be intoxicated, either by wine or by compliments. At last the elder sister made a sign, and one of the pages brought him a large golden cup. "The enchanted castle has no more secrets for you," she said to the stargazer. "Let us drink to your triumph." He cast a lingering glance at the little princess, and without hesitation lifted up the cup. "Don't drink!" suddenly cried out the little princess. "I would rather marry a gardener." And she burst into tears. Michael flung the contents of the cup behind him, sprang over the table, and fell at Lena's feet. The rest of the princes fell likewise at the knees of the princesses, each of whom chose a husband and raised him to her side. The charm was broken. The 12 couples embarked in the boats, which crossed back many times in order to carry all the other princes. Then they all went through woods, and when they all passed the door to the underground passage, a great noise was heard, as if the enchanted castle was crumbling to the earth. And they went straight to the room of the Duke of Belleville, who had just awoken. Michael held his hand the golden cup, and he revealed the secret of the holes in the shoes. "Choose then," said the Duke, "whichever you prefer." "My choice is already made," replied the garden boy, and he offered his hand to the youngest princess, who blushed and lowered her eyes. Princess Lena did not become a gardener's wife. On the contrary, it was a stargazer who became a prince. But before the marriage ceremony, the princesses insisted that her lover should tell her how he came to discover the secrets. So he showed her the two laurels which had helped him, and she, like a prudent girl, thinking they gave him too much advantage over his wife, cut them off at the root and threw them in a fire. And this is why the country girls go on singing, "Nos learns plus de bois, les lovers sont couples," and dancing in summer by the light of the moon. Oh, I really should learn French sometime, because a lot of these stories have French that I'm not sure I'm pronouncing them right. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'm not. Okay. Gotta hydrate. I've thought about doing the coffee about post for a while. If you ever want to leave me a tip or have a story recommendation, do it through coffee. And I will try my best to get a hold of that story, and I will do a recording for you. Seem fair? And it doesn't take me much to find the stories, honestly. But again, if you want me to do a custom read like that, I will do it, post it on YouTube as a private one or a public one, depending on your choice, I guess. And there you'll have it. I really wish my model's mouth would respond better. I don't know if it's just my video processor that's not doing much or what. Let's see if we can do the microphone syncing again. Yes, I want you to sync it with this microphone, thank you. Clip sync type. I haven't tried this one yet. Hi. Okay. Just to see if it'll do any better. Doesn't look like it is. Oh well. So we continue with our second wonderful story for this Friday night fairy tale. And this story, oddly enough, is just one princess. The Princess Mayblossom. Once upon a time, there lived a king and queen whose children had all died. First one, and then another, until at last only one little daughter remained. and the queen was at her wit's end to know where to find a really good nurse who would take care of her and bring her up. A herald was sent who blew a trumpet at every street corner and commanded all the best nurses to appear before the queen, that she might choose one for her little princess. So on the appointed day the whole palace was crowded with nurses, who came from the four corners of the world to offer themselves, until the queen declared that if she was ever to see half of them, they must be brought out to her, one by one. And she sat in a shady wood near the palace. This was accordingly done, and the nurses, after they had made their courtesy to the king and queen, arranged themselves in a line before her that she might choose. Most of them were fair and fat and charming, but there was one who was dark-skinned and ugly, and spoke in a strange language which nobody could understand. The queen wondered how she dared offer herself, and she was told to go away, as certainly she would not do. Upon which she muttered something and passed on, but hid herself in the hollow of a tree, from which she could see all that happened. The queen herself, without giving her another thought, chose a rosy, pretty-faced nurse. But no sooner was her choice made than a snake, which was hidden in the grass, bit that very nurse on her foot, so that she fell down dead. The queen was very much vexed by this accident, but soon she selected another, who was just stepping forward when an eagle flew by and dropped a large tortoise upon her head, which was cracked in pieces like an eggshell. At this the queen, clearly, was much horrified. Nevertheless, she chose a third time, but with no better fortune, for the nurse, moving quickly, ran into a branch of the tree and blinded herself with a thorn. Then the queen, in dismay, cried that there must be some malignant influence at work, and that she should choose no more that day. And she had just risen to return to the palace when she heard peals of malicious laughter behind her, and turning around saw the ugly stranger whom she had dismissed, who was making very merry over the disasters and mocking everyone, but especially the queen. This annoyed her majesty very much, and she was about to order that she should be arrested, when the witch, for she was a witch, with 2 blows of a wand summoned a chariot of fire drawn by winged dragons, and was whirled off through the air, uttering threats and cries. When the king saw this, he cried, "Alas! Now we are ruined indeed, for that was no other than the fairy Caraboss, who has a grudge against me ever since I was a boy, and put sulphur in her... Oh, I did put sulphur in her porridge for one day for fun." Then the queen began to cry. "If only I'd known it was," she said, "I would have done my best to make friends with her. Now I suppose all is lost." The king was sorry to have frightened her so much, and proposed that they should go and hold a council as to what was best to be done to avert the misfortunes which Caraboss certainly meant to bring upon the little princess. So all the counselors were summoned to the palace, and when they had shut every door and window and stuffed up every keyhole that they might not be overheard, they talked the affair over and decided that every fairy for 1,000 leagues round should be invited to the christening of the princess, and that the time of the ceremony should be kept a profound secret, in case the fairy Caraboss should take it into her head to attend it. The queen and her ladies set to work to prepare presents for the fairies who were invited, for each a blue velvet cloak, a petticoat of apricot satin, a pair of high-heeled shoes, some sharp needles, and a pair of golden scissors. Of all the fairies the queen knew, only 5 were able to come on the appointed day, but they began immediately to bestow gifts upon the princess. One promised that she would be perfectly beautiful, the second that she should understand anything, no matter what, the first time it was explained to her. The third that she should sing like a nightingale, The fourth, that she should succeed in everything she undertook, and the fifth was just opening her mouth to speak, when a tremendous rumbling was heard in the chimney, and Caraboss, all covered with soot, came rolling down, crying,
I say that she shall be the unluckiest of the unlucky until she is 20 years old.
Then the queen and all the fairies began to beg and beseech her to think better of it, and not to be so unkind to the poor little princess, who had never done her any harm. But the ugly old fairy only grunted and made no answer. So the last fairy, who had not yet given her gift, tried to mend matters by promising the princess a long and happy life after the fatal day was over. At this, Caraboss laughed maniacally and climbed away into the chimney, leaving them all in great consternation, and especially the queen. However, she entertained the fairies splendidly and gave them beautiful ribbons of which they were very fond, in addition to other presents. When they were going away, the oldest fairy said that they were of the opinion that it would be best to shut the princess up in some place, with waiting women, so that she might not see anyone else until she was 20 years old. So the king had a tower built for that purpose. It had no windows, so it was lighted with wax candles, and the only way into it was by an underground passage, which had iron doors only 20 feet apart, and the guard were posted everywhere. The princess had been named Mayblossom, because she was as fresh and blooming as spring itself, and she grew up tall and beautiful, and everything she did was said to be charming. Every time the king and queen came to see her, they were more delighted with her than before. But though she was weary of the tower, and often begged them to take her away from it, they always refused. The princess's nurse, who had never left her, sometimes told her about the world outside the tower, and though the princess had never seen anything for herself, yet she always understood exactly thanks to the second fairy's gift. Often the king said to the queen, "We are cleverer than Caraboss after all. Our Mayblossom will be happy in spite of her predictions." And the queen laughed until she was tired of the idea of having outwitted the old fairy. They had caused the princess's portrait to be painted and sent to all the neighboring courts, for in 4 days she would have completed her 20th year. And it was time to decide whom she should marry. All the town was rejoicing at the thought of the princess's approaching freedom, and when the news came that King Merlin was sending his ambassador to ask for her in marriage for his son, they were still more delighted. The nurse, who kept the princess informed of everything that went forward in the town, did not fail to repeat the news that so nearly concerned her, and gave her such a description of the splendor in which the ambassador Fanfaronad would enter the town that the princess was wild to see the procession for herself. "What an unhappy creature I am," she cried, "to be shut up in this dismal tower as if I had been condemned of some crime. I have never seen the sun, or the stars, or a horse, or a monkey, or a lion, except in pictures, and though the king and queen tell me that I will be set free when I am 20, I believe they only say it to keep me amused, when they never mean to let me out at all." And then she began to cry, and her nurse, and the nurse's daughter, and the cradle rocker, and the nursery maid, all who loved her dearly, cried too for company, so that nothing could be heard but sobs and sighs. It was a scene of woe. When the princess saw that they all pitied her, she made up her mind to have her own way. So she declared that she would starve herself to death if they did not find some means of letting her see Fanfaronid's entry into the town.
"If you really love me," she said, "you will manage it somehow or other, and the king and queen need never know anything about it."
Then the nurse and all the others cried harder than ever and said everything they could think of to turn the princess from her idea. But the more they said, the more determined she was. And at last they consented to make a tiny hole in the tower on the side that looked towards the city gates. After scratching and scraping all day and all night, they presently made a hole through which they could, with great difficulty, push a slender needle, and out of this the princess looked at the daylight for the first time. She was so dazzled and delighted by what she saw that there she stayed, never taking her eyes away from the people for a single minute, until presently the ambassador's procession appeared in sight. At the head of it rode Fanfaronad himself upon a white horse, which pranced and cackled to the sound of the trumpets. Nothing could have been more splendid than the ambassador's attire. His coat was nearly hidden under the embroidery of pearls and diamonds. His boots were solid gold, and from his helmet floated a scarlet plume. At the sight of him the princess lost her wits entirely, and determined that Fanfaronad and nobody else she would marry.
"It is quite impossible," she said, "that his master should be half as handsome and delightful. I am not ambitious, and having spent all my life in this tower, anything, even a house in the country, will seem a delightful change. I am sure that bread and water shared with Fanfaronad will please me far better than roast chicken or sweetmeats with anyone else."
And so she went on, talking until her waiting women wondered where she got it all from. And when they tried to stop her and represented that her high rank made it perfectly impossible that she should do such a thing, but she would not listen and ordered them to be silent. As soon as the ambassador arrived at the palace, the queen started to fetch her daughter. All the streets were spread with carpets. All the windows were full of ladies who were waiting to see the princess, and carried flowers of baskets and sweetmeats to shower upon her head as she passed. They had hardly begun to get the princess ready when a dwarf arrived, mounted upon an elephant. He came from the 5 fairies and brought for the princess a crown, a scepter, and a robe of golden brocade, with a petticoat marvelously embroidered with butterfly wings. They also sent a casket of jewels, so splendid that no one had ever seen anything like it before, and the queen was perfectly dazzled when she opened it. But the princess scarcely gave a glance to any of the treasures, for she thought of nothing but Fanfaronad. The dwarf was rewarded with a gold piece, and decorated with so many ribbons that it was hardly possible to see him at all. The princess sent to each of the fairies a new spinning wheel with a distaff of cedar wood, and the queen said she must look through her treasures and find something very charming to send them also. When the princess was arrayed in all her gorgeous things the dwarf had brought, she was more beautiful than ever, and she walked along the streets, and the people cried, "Oh, how pretty she is! Oh, how pretty she is!" The procession consisted of the queen, the princess, 5 other princesses, her cousins, and 24 who came from the neighboring kingdoms, and they proceeded at a stately pace. The sky began to grow dark, and suddenly thunder growled, and rain and hail fell in torrents. The queen put her royal mantle over her head, and all the princesses did the same with their trains. Mayblossom was just about to follow their example when a terrific croaking of an intense army of crows, rooks, ravens, screech owls, and all birds of ill omen was heard. At the same time, a huge owl skimmed up to the princess and threw over her a scarf of woven of spiderwebs and embroidered with bats' wings. And then peals of mocking laughter rang through the air, and they guessed this was another of Fairy Caracross's unpleasant jokes. The queen was terrified at such an evil omen and tried to pull the black scarf from the princess's shoulders, but it really seemed as if it had been nailed on. It clung so closely.
"Ah!" cried the queen. "Can nothing appease this enemy of ours? What good was it that I sent her more than 50 pounds of sweetmeats, and as such and the best sugar, not to mention 2 whole Westphalia hams? She is as angry as ever."
While she lamented in this way, and everyone was wet as if they had been dragged through a river, the princess was still thinking of nothing but the ambassador. And just at this moment he appeared before her, with the king, and there was a great blowing of trumpets, and all the people shouted louder than ever. Fanfaronade was not generally at a loss for something to say, but when he saw the princess, she was so much more beautiful and majestic than he had expected that he could ever only stammer out a few words, and entirely forgot the whole haranguing which he had been learning for months, and knew well enough to have repeated it in his sleep. To gain time to remember the last part of it, he made several low bows to the princess, who on her side dropped half a dozen curtsies without stopping to think, and then said, to relieve his evident embarrassment,
"Sir Ambassador, I am sure that everything you intended to say is charming, since it is you who mean to say it. But let us make haste to the palace, as it is pouring cats and dogs, and the wicked Fairy Caraboss will be amused to seeing us all standing dripping here. When we are once under the shelter, we can laugh at her."
"Stop laughing at fairies." Upon this, the ambassador found his tongue and replied gallantly that the fairy had eventually foreseen the flames that would be kindled by the bright eyes of the princess, and had sent this deluge to extinguish them. Then he offered his hand to conduct the princess, and she said softly,
"As you could not possibly guess how much I like you, Sir Fanfaronade, I am obliged to tell you plainly that, since I saw you enter the town on your beautiful prancing horse, I have been sorry that you came to speak for another instead of for yourself. So, if you think about it as I do, I will marry you instead of your master. Of course, I know that you are not a prince, and I shall be just as fond of you as if you were, and we can go and live in some cozy little corner of the world and be as happy as the days are long."
The ambassador thought she might be out of it, and he must be dreaming, for he could hardly believe what the lovely princess said. He dared not answer, but only squeezed the princess's hand until he really hurt her little finger. But she did not cry out. When they reached the palace, the king kissed his daughter on both cheeks and said, "My little lambkin, are you willing to marry the great King Merlin's son? For this ambassador has come on his behalf to fetch you."
"I consent also," said the queen, "so let the banquet be proposed."
This was done with all speed, and everybody feasted except Mayblossom and Fanfaronade, who looked at one another and forgot everything else. After the banquet came a ball, and after that again a ballet. And as they were so tired that everyone fell asleep just where they sat. Only the lovers were as wide awake as mice, and the princess, seeing that there was nothing to fear, said to Fanfaronade,
"Let us be quick and run away, for we shall never have a better chance than this."
Then she took the king's dagger, which was the diamond sheath, and the queen's neck handkerchief, and gave her hand to Fanfaronade, who carried a lantern, and they ran out together into the muddy street and down to the seashore. Here they got into a little boat in which the poor old boatman was sleeping, and when he woke up and saw the lovely princess with all her diamonds and her spider's web scarf, he did not know what to think, and obeyed her instantly when she commanded him to set out. They could see neither the moon nor stars, but in the queen's neck handkerchief there was a carbuncle which glowed like 50 torches. Fanfaronade asked the princess where she would like to go, but she only answered that she did not care where she went as long as she was with him. "But, princess," he said, "I dare not take you back to King Merlin's court. He would think hanging too good for me."
"Oh, in that case," she answered, "we had better go to Squirrel Island. It is lonely enough and too far off for anyone to follow us there."
So she ordered the old boatman to steer for Squirrel Island. Meanwhile the day was breaking, and the king and queen and all the courtiers began to wake up and rub their eyes, and think it was time to finish the preparations for the wedding. And the queen asked for her neck handkerchief, that she might look smart. Then there was a scurrying hither and there, and hunting everywhere. They looked into every place, from the wardrobes to the stoves, and the queen herself ran from the garret to the cellar, but the handkerchief was nowhere to be found. By this time the king had missed his dagger, and his search began all over again. They opened boxes and chests of which the keys had been lost for 100 years, and found numbers of curious things, but not the dagger. And the king tore his beard, and the queen tore her hair, for the handkerchief and the dagger were the most valuable things in the kingdom. When the king saw that the search was hopeless, he said, "Never mind, let us make haste and get the wedding over before anything else is lost." And then he asked where the princess was. Upon this her nurse came forward and said,
"Sire, I have been seeking her these 2 hours, but she is nowhere to be found."
This was more than the queen could bear. She gave a shriek of alarm and fainted away, and they had to pour down 2 barrels of eau de cologne into her just to get her to recover. When she came to herself, everybody was looking for the princess, and in the greatest terror and confusion, but she did not appear anywhere, and the king said to his page, "Go and find Ambassador Fanfaronade, who is doubtless asleep in some corner, and tell him the sad news." So the page hunted hither and thither, but Fanfaronade was no more to be found than the princess, the dagger, or the neck handkerchief. Then the king summoned his counselors and his guards, and accompanied by the queen into his great hall. As he had not time to prepare his speech beforehand, the king ordered that silence should be kept for 3 hours, and at the end of that time he spoke as follows. "Listen, great and small. My dear daughter Mayblossom is lost. Whether she has been stolen away or has simply disappeared, I cannot tell. The queen's neck handkerchief and my sword, which were worth their weight in gold, are also missing. And what is worst of all, the ambassador Fanfaronade is nowhere to be found. I greatly fear that the king, his master, when he receives no tidings from him, will come to seek him among us, and will accuse us of having made mincemeat of him. Perhaps I should bear even that I had any money, but assure you that the expenses of the wedding have completely emptied me. Advise me then, my dear subjects, what I had better do to recover my daughter, Fanfaronade, and the other things." This was the most eloquent speech the king had ever been known to make. When everybody had been done admiring it, the prime minister made answer,
"Sire, we're all very sorry to see you so sorry. We would give anything we value in the world to take away the cause of your sorrow. But this seems to be another of the tricks of the fairy Carabosse. The princess's 20 unlucky years were not quite over, and really, if the truth is to be told, I noticed that Fanfaronade and the princess appeared to admire each other very greatly. Perhaps this may give some clue to the mystery of their disappearance.
Here the queen interrupted him, saying,
Take care what you say, sir. Believe me, the Princess Mayblossom was far too well brought up to think of falling in love with an ambassador.
At this, the nurse came forward and, falling to her knees, confessed how they had made a little needle hole in the tower, and how the princess had declared when she saw the ambassador that she would marry him and nobody else. Then the queen was very angry, and gave the nurse and the cradle rocker and the nursery maid such a scolding that they shook in their shoes. But the Admiral Cockhat interrupted her, saying, Let us be after this good-for-nothing Fanfaronade. Without a doubt he has run away with our princess. Then there was a great clapping of hands, and everybody shouted, By all means, let us be after him! So, while some embarked upon the sea, and others ran from kingdom to kingdom, beating drums and blowing trumpets, or whatever the crowd collectors they cried, Whoever wants a beautiful doll, sweetmeats of all kinds, a pair of scissors, a golden robe, and a satin cap, has only to say where Fanfaronade has hidden Princess Mayblossom. But the answer everywhere was, You must go further. We have not seen them. However, those who went by the sea were more fortunate, for after sailing about for some time they noticed a light before them which burned as bright like a great fire. At first they dared not go near it, not knowing what it might be, but by and by it remained stationary over Squirrel Island, for, as you have already guessed, the light was the glowing of the carbuncle. The princess and Fanfaronade, on landing upon the island, had given the boatman 100 gold pieces, and made him promise solemnly to tell no one where he had taken them. But the first thing that happened was that he rowed away, he got into the midst of the fleet, and before he could escape, the admiral had seen him and sent a boat after him. When he was searched, they found the gold pieces in his pocket, and as they were quite newly struck coins, struck in honor of the princess's wedding, in fact, the admiral felt certain that the boatman must have been paid by the princess to aid in their flight. But he would not answer any questions, and pretended to be deaf and dumb. Then the admiral said, Oh, deaf and dumb, is he? Lash him to the mast and give him a taste of the cat of nine tails. I don't know anything better than that for curing the deaf and dumb. When the old boatman saw that he was in earnest, he told all he knew about the cavalier and the lady whom had landed upon Squirrel Island. And the admiral knew it must be the princess and Fanfaronade, so he gave the order for the fleet to surround the island. Meanwhile, the Princess Mayblossom, who was by this time terribly sleepy, had found a grassy bank in the shade, and throwing herself down had already fallen into a profound slumber, when Fanfaronade, who happened to be hungry and not sleepy, came and woke her up, and was saying very crossly, Pray, madam, how long do you mean to stay here? I see nothing to eat, and though you may be very charming, the sight of you does not prevent me from famishing.
What, Fanfaronade? Said the princess, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. Is it possible that when I am here with you, you want nothing else? You ought to be thinking of how happy you are. How happy you are.
Happy? He cried. Say, rather unhappy. I wish with all my heart that you were back in your dark tower again.
Darling, don't be cross, said the princess. I will go, and I will see if I can find you some wild fruit for you.
I wish you might find a wolf to eat you up, growled Fanfaronade. The princess, in great dismay, ran hither and thither all about the woods, tearing her dress and hurting her pretty white hands with the thorns and brambles. But all she could find was nothing good to eat, and at last she had to go back sorrowfully to Fanfaronade. When he saw that she came empty-handed, he got up and left her, grumbling to himself. The next day they searched again, but with no better success.
Alas, said the princess, if only I could find something for you to eat. I should not mind being hungry myself.
No, I should not mind that either, answered Fanfaronade.
It is possible, she said, that you would not care if I died of hunger. Oh, Fanfaronade, you said you loved me.
That was when we were quite in another place, and I was not hungry. Hangry, he said. It makes a great difference in one's ideas to be dying of hunger and thirst on a desert island. At this, the princess was dreadfully vexed, and she sat down under a white rose bush and began to cry bitterly.
Happy roses, she thought to herself. They have only to blossom in the sunshine and be admired, and there is nobody to be unkind to them.
And then the tears ran down her cheeks and splashed on the rose tree roots. Presently she was surprised to see the whole bush rustling and shaking, and a soft little voice from the prettiest rosebud said,
Poor princess, look in the trunk of that tree, and you will find a honeycomb. But don't be foolish enough to share it with Fanfaronade.
Mayblossom ran to the tree, and sure enough, there was the honey. Without losing a moment, she ran with it to Fanfaronade, crying gaily,
See, there's a honeycomb that I found. I might have eaten it all up by myself, but I had to rather share it with you.
But without looking at her, or thanking her, he snatched the honeycomb out of her hands and ate it all up, every bit, without offering her even a morsel. Indeed, she humbly asked for some. He said, mocking, that it was too sweet for her and would spoil her teeth. Mayblossom, more downcast than ever, went sadly away and sat down under an oak tree. And her tears and sighs were so piteous that the oak fanned her with its rustling leaves and said, Take courage, pretty princess. All is not lost yet. Take this pitcher of milk and drink it up. Whatever you do, don't leave a drop for Fanfaronade. The princess, quite astonished, looked around and saw a big pitcher full of milk. But before she could raise it to her lips, the thought of how thirsty Fanfaronade must be, after eating at least 15 pounds of honey, made her run back to him and say,
Here is a pitcher of milk. Drink some. You must be thirsty, I am sure. But pray save a little for me, as I am dying of hunger and thirst.
But he seized the pitcher and drank it all contained in a single draught, and then broke it into atoms on the nearest stone, saying that with a malicious smile, And you have not eaten anything, you cannot be thirsty. Cried the princess.
I am well punished for disappointing the king and queen and running away with the ambassador, about whom I knew nothing.
And so saying, she wandered away into the thickest part of the wood, and sat down under a thorn tree, where a nightingale was singing. Presently she heard him say,
Search under the bush, princess. You will find some sugar, almonds, and some tarts there. But don't be silly enough to offer Fanfaronade any.
And this time the princess, who was fainting with hunger, took the nightingale's advice, and ate all that she found all by herself. But Fanfaronade, seeing that she had found something good, and was not going to share with him, ran after her in such a fury that she hastily drew the queen's carbuncle, which had been the property of rendering people invisible if they were in danger, and when she was safely hidden from him, she reproached him gently for his unkindness. Meanwhile, Admiral Cocktat had just dispatched Jack the Chatterer of the Straw Boots, a courier of extraordinary to the Prime Minister, to tell him that the princess and the ambassador had landed on Squirrel Island, but not knowing the country, he had not pursued them, for fear of being captured by concealed enemies. Their Majesties were overjoyed with the news, and the king sent for a great book, each leaf of which was 8 ells long. It was the work of a very clever fairy, and contained descriptions of the entire earth. He very soon found that Squirrel Island was completely uninhabited. "Go," said he to Jack the Chatterer. "Tell the Admiral for me to land at once. I'm surprised at his not having done so sooner." As soon as this message reached the fleet, every preparation was made for war, and the noise was so great that it reached the ears of the princess, who at once flew to protect her lover, as he was not very brave, and he accepted her gladly. "You stand behind me," she said, "and I will hold the carbuncle which shall make us invisible, and with the king's dagger I can protect you from the enemy." So when the soldiers landed they could see nothing, but the princess touched them one after another with the dagger, and they fell insensible upon the sand. So at last the admiral, seeing that there was some enchantment, hastily giving orders for a sheet to be sounded, and got his men back into their boats in great confusion. Fanfaronade, being once more left with the princess, began to think that if he could get rid of her and possess himself of the carbuncle and the dagger, he would be able to make his escape. So they walked back to the cliffs, and he gave the princess a great push, hoping she would fall into the sea. But she stepped aside so quickly that he only succeeded in overbouncing himself, and over he went, and sank to the bottom of the sea like a lump of lead, and was never heard of any more. While the princess was still looking after him in horror, her attention was attracted by a rushing noise over her head, and looking up she saw 2 chariots approaching rapidly from opposite directions. One was bright and glittering, and drawn by swans and peacocks, while the fairy who sat in it was beautiful as a sunbeam. But the other was drawn by bats and ravens, and contained a frightful little dwarf, who was dressed in a snake skin, and wore a great toad upon her head for a hood. The chariots met with a frightful crash in mid-air. The princess looked on breathlessly with anxiety, while the furious battle took place between the lovely fairy and her golden lance, and the hideous little dwarf and her rusty pike. But very soon it was evident that the beauty had the best of it, and the dwarf turned her bats' heads and flickered away in a great confusion, while the fairy came down to where the princess stood and said, smiling, "You see, my princess, I have completely routed the malicious old Caraboss. Will you believe it? She actually wanted to claim authority over you forever, because you came out of the tower 4 days before the 20 years were ended. However, I think I've settled her pretensions, and I hope you will be very happy and enjoy the freedom I have won you." The princess thanked her heartily, and then the fairy dispatched one of her peacocks to bring her to the palace, and bring a gorgeous robe for Mayblossom, who certainly needed it, for her own was torn to shreds by the thorns and the briars. Another peacock was sent to the admiral to tell him that he could now land in perfect safety, which he did at once, bringing all his men with him. Even Jack the Chatterer, who happened to pass spit upon the admiral's dinner while roasting, snatched it up and brought it with him. Admiral Cocktat was immensely surprised when he came upon the golden chariot, and still more so to see 2 lovely ladies walking under the tree a little further away. When he reached them, he of course recognized the princess, and went down on his knees and kissed her hands quite joyfully. Then she pressed him to the fairy, and told him how Caraboss had been finally routed, and he thanked and congratulated the fairy, who was most gracious to him. And while they were talking, she cried suddenly, "I declare I smell a savory dinner." "Why, yes, madam, here it is," said Jack the Chatterer, holding up the spit, where all the pheasants and partridges were fizzling. "Will your highness please taste any of them?"
"By all means," said the fairy, especially as the princess will certainly be glad for a good meal.
So the admiral was sent back to his ship for everything that was needed, and they had a merry feast under the trees. By the time they had finished, the peacock had come back with a robe for the princess, in which the fairy arrayed her. It was of green and gold brocade, embroidered with pearls and rubies, and her long golden hair was tied back with strings of diamonds and emeralds, and crowned with flowers. The fairy made her mount up beside her in the golden chariot, and took her on board the admiral's ship, where she bade her farewell, sending many messages of friendship to the queen, and bidding the princess tell her that she was the fifth fairy who attended the christening. Then the salutes were fired, and the fleet weighed anchor, and very soon they reached port. Here the king and queen were waiting, as they received the princess with such joy and kindness that she could not get a word in edgewise, even to say how sorry she was for having run away with such a poor-spirited ambassador. But after all, it had been all Caraboss's fault, just this lucky moment which had arrived the King Merlin's son, who had become uneasy at not receiving news from his ambassador, and so started himself on the magnificent escort of 1,000 horsemen, and 30 bodyguards in gold and scarlet uniforms, to see what could have happened. As he was 100 times handsomer and braver than the ambassador, the princess found that she could like him very much. So the wedding was held at once, with much splendor and rejoicing, that all the previous misfortunes were forgotten. And thank you for coming in, Locapelia, and yes, happy Halloween to you too. Yeah, I do kind of get on a roll on stories.
Especially when I have to do voices for them, because voices are so much fun to do.
And those are two long stories right at the beginning of the book. Ooh, I know Soria Moria Castle is a long one. No. Soria Moria Castle is only 12 pages. 12 Dancing Princesses was 14. Mayblossom was 19. Dang. Check the names to see how well I'm be able to pronounce these. This one is definitely a Norse Tale. Halvorn. Ooh. Get to a T. Yeah, I may go and do that for next time. Oh. So this may be a short stream. It's probably good because my phone battery is not wanting to charge, so my tracking isn't that great in the first place. Oh. Let's see. Dusk is on. Who else is on? My camera is still. There we go. It's altered up to. Check. he's reading The Longing. Okay, that's been read altered. Do have a forward read message if anyone wants to use that. Have a subscriber read message. Okay, we will read altered. So, thank you everyone for coming in tonight. Sorry, cutting a little bit short, but if I'd gone another story, it would have been considerably longer. So I will hopefully see you all next time. I know I'm going to be reading Thursday and Friday. Because Sherlock Holmes on Thursdays, Fairy Tales on Fridays. I may do some random gaming stream during the week, so I hope I will see you sometime then. I'll see you all over there. And that raid was delayed.